The Australian author Daisy Bates once wrote, "Heaven is the sound of happy children at play." Heaven is the sound of happy children at play. But when you see the television screen choked full of the faces of children from countries rife with famine, faces of children refugees on those endless roads, or on board a raft which some people might call a boat, glazed and frightened on the never, never future path to death, you know that is not heaven. Those kids may never know what it would be like to play with other happy children. Well might we ourselves say in our comparative opulence, how might we keep our spirit alive? For those kids, the question is more, how will they restore hope to their spirit? How will their already damaged spirits be healed when all the politics have been pushed and posted? What sort of future is possible for the human spirit that has been already crushed? One of the treasured psalms of your Bible says, "The Lord is close to those whose courage is broken. He saves those who are crushed in spirit." Well, that's a good idea. But where is the substance of it? Or that psalm that I read today, Psalm 137, where they said, how can we forget what has happened to us? How can we ever again sing the Lord's song? Peter Boyle, a poet of our times, wrote, our too real, loveless continent. Loveless continent. That sounds at odds, doesn't it, with the hype of royal weddings and the apparent obsessive urge amongst the too young and the too old to be married, despite the high incidence of marital disillusionment and divorce. Or we see their passionate desire to have children, and alongside of that, the high incidence of child abuse, domestic violence. So we have the urge to be loved and the reality of damaged love. Our all too real, loveless continent. In the church, which has long claimed to be the true church, we hear of the disgrace of bishops and priests and teachers who have brought lifelong catastrophe into the lives of children who trusted them, or who had never had sufficient time to learn how to protect their own vulnerability. The church too has been part of that too real, loveless continent. In a recent edition of the Australian Literary Review, Geoffrey Blaney asked the question, is the Western world clinging to an old compass that no longer points the way? It would seem that we've lost touch with something. In the past, it seemed simple enough. We voted left or right. It was black or white. Now we find highly educated people trying to push the same dichotomies, one or the other, dumbed down to believe that the new world is as simple as the old, or even that it is the same world. This very week, we're remembering a man called Marshall McLuhan, back in 1967. Marshall McLuhan, he wrote this. He said, the medium, electronic technology, is reshaping and restructuring every aspect of our personal life. Every institution, everything is changing, and changing dramatically. That was 1967. He lived before the sophistications of the iPhone and the iPods and the iPads and the Facebook and the Twitter and the social media. The social media that today have brought down totalitarian governments, threatened dictatorships, destroyed the drawbridges, capsized the castles of corporate barons, and so on. Perhaps we have not adapted to the fact that we're no longer able to get and take what we want without thinking of the penetrating impact on other people, the consequences. Just as once it was possible to claim nuclear armaments, yes, we'll have them. Or nuclear missiles, yes, we'll have more of them. Without too much thought about waste disposal or the effects all this might have on a fragile global ecology. We've lost touch with something. Late yesterday, I was helping a young 16-year-old with his homework, an essay on Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant's views on the morality of means and ends, of intentions and outcome, on what is goodwill and what is bad will. And I wondered, are we today, with all our learning and education, any better than our grandparents who never heard of Immanuel Kant? And when it comes to making the choices, are we still constrained by what was laid down on us in the past? Or have we yet caught up with the need for a critical reassessment of what was laid down in the past, of what was and is morally right? We're hearing so much about climate change and climate warming and carbon emissions. Are we also the victims, as of old, of prejudice and self-interest and ignorance? If I took a plebiscite of all of us here today, I think I would find that I am not alone in being ignorant and uninformed on these matters. And yet we're being pushed into old prejudices, old positions, without that critical reassessment. Even in a very democratic country, where all are given airtime for their views, sometimes I think far too much airtime, we quickly see how people become solidified into the same views that they held 20 years ago or that their parents held 60 years ago, when in fact we're all flailing about in a flood of a vast evolution. Evolution in knowledge, evolution in technology, evolution in travel and transport, evolution in social relationships, evolution in medicine and health, evolution in health practices, evolution in psychology, evolution in religion. So we need to find a new compass that might point us in different ways to live in the 21st century. Evolution of religion? Yes, of course. While so many of our religions have been cuddled up with Rip Van Winkle, there has been a vast evolution taking place in theological research, in the evolution in our understanding of the Bible. And would you look at this huge volume, Robert Wright's book, 2009, on the evolution of God. The evolution of God. Of course, we no longer hold the same beliefs about God as people held 200, 400, 600, even 2,000, 3,000 years ago. We have evolved. We no longer hold the same views as many of the writers of the Bible would put up for what God is like. Look at some of the Psalms, for which reason I retranslated some of the Psalms to sanitize them, if you like, to take out some of those passages which had God as being violent, abusive towards children, or towards people generally. So we need to see that we're part of a vast evolution. We know so little about the Muslim religion, as was shown from our Muslim guest last Sunday. She equally showed she knew so little about contemporary Christian thinking. We both know so little about each other. And we can see that at so many of these interfaith conferences, we're poles apart. We don't know what we're talking about. We're often stuck in what Kant called our external constraints. And yet the progress of evolution has accelerated. Australian poet Judith Wright, in a magnificent poem, spoke of our kind of world and to each of us in the core of our being. And she wrote, "How to live, I said, as the flame tree lives. To know what the flame tree knows. To be prodigal in my life as that wild tree and wear my passion so." And the ancient prophet Micah asked his question, what does the Lord require of you? He's told you, act with kindness, show justice, walk wisely with your God. But actions are actions, and we mouth them off. They need an underpinning and a motivation and an energy of the inner spirit, an inner spirit that is the very center of our life, restored, evolving, searching for harmony, alive. But how do we keep the human spirit alive? There are hundreds of ways to keep the human spirit alive. We'll take 4 or 5. But you might say, but why bother? Why bother about the human spirit when for so long it has been neglected or disregarded by medicine, by psychology? It has been stifled by many expressions of education and subjected to so much empty babble by many expressions of religion. So why bother? Why try to reconnect lifelines to the human spirit? I suggest the following. We want to reconnect with the human spirit because without it, we neglect one aspect of the human personality and a powerful energy of our human community. Because in the human spirit, we see the human being at his or her best. That's why we need to study the human spirit, because the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of the human spirit, can be so vital in coping with our adversities. We need to be in touch with the human spirit because the human spirit comes alive when it is touched by the sounds of music, by the expressions of kindness and tenderness. Because the human spirit expands when it stands in front of a great painting, an awesome landscape, an inspiring presence. But how do we keep the human spirit alive? If it is so important, yes, it is important, I believe. How do we keep it alive? I'm going to give you 4 or 5 ways to keep it alive. First, we need to expose it to good health practices. How do we keep the human body alive? We expose it to good health practices. We keep it in touch with healthy environments. The body. When it is ill, we connect it with vital lifelines. We have people studying at high level how to keep the human body alive. Shouldn't we do the same for the human spirit if it is so important? We need to realize that there has been a vast evolution in our understanding of the human spirit, and we need to keep up with that evolution and adapt constructively to it. Otherwise, our own human spirit begins to deteriorate, begins to lose its vitality, and finally, it will die. The second issue, how do we keep the human spirit alive? It means letting healing take place. Just as the body needs healing, just as the mind needs healing, so the spirit needs healing. We've learned so much about the first two, so little about the last. And yet without the healing of the human spirit, we become so much the less. The spirit needs to be healed. Gwen Harwood, the poet, in her space of a dream, discusses her dead friend. But she finds in her dream her dead friend is alive in her dream. And then she pauses and said, from the alien space of dream without history or intention, I am thrust into actual sunlight, from level to level of thought and symbol. I know this dream for what it is, the beginning of healing, the heart's endless need, she said. Third, how do we keep the human spirit alive? I've mentioned before the study that's been taking place in the United States Army. They are actually studying spirit education. And the soldiers have been asked, amongst other things, to explore ways of strengthening the human spirit and thus prepare themselves for the distressing situations that they'll find themselves in. Homesickness, being in life-threatening situations, needing to recover from injuries and wounds, being in close contact with some people that you like, some people that you could never like, and then living in close contact with one man, one woman who's been blown to pieces. How do we recover? How do they recover? So they've been teaching them to prepare and strengthen the human spirit in advance. We need to think about that for ourselves. How do we prepare to strengthen the human spirit for whatever situation we might find ourselves in? The fourth issue. When so many events can close off those desired and enjoyable pathways of life, it is all too easy to shrivel up, to withdraw, to hold back, to become cynical. The task is to refocus. The focus of life is to claim a time of quietness, a time of contemplation, so that we get back in touch with your core values and find a pathway of new exploration and growth of the inner being. So I've given you four ways to keep the human spirit alive. First, expose the human spirit to healthy environments, to healthy practices. Second, make sure that necessary healing takes place. Third, be part of an education in ways that actually prepare and strengthen the spirit. And fourth, focus on those pathways for exploration and growth for the human spirit. Four things. I'll give you a fifth. Keep nurturing and expanding the best emotions, because that's where the human spirit comes into its own. It means to regulate our tendency to be angry and hostile and resentful and all those negatives of cynicism and despair, to regulate those down and to regulate the positive emotions up, like compassion and kindness and encouragement and gentleness and tolerance and goodness and joyful astonishment. Yes, astonishment. Coleridge had a dream too. And it's a good reminder for us. He said, if a man could pass through paradise in a dream and have a flower presented to him as a pledge that his soul had really been there in paradise, and if he found that flower in his hand when he awoke, aye, what then? He'd be amazed, astonished, awestruck. The best emotions are the very core of our best spirit. And they need to be nurtured and expanded